the keyboard a bit so that you can get a bit of an instrument happening with it. Now, I said that there were some synthesis possibilities in Specimen, and that's where you find all this stuff over here. So there is a filter, and it's just like the filter in Xsynth. It's got cutoff and resonance. So that's sort of dulled the sound quite a bit. You can hear that's dulled a little bit. That's back to full now, so you can tune that in, and again, resonance gives you that different kind of resonant effect. It's fairly subtle, the resonance in Specimen. I don't know what kind of filter it is. I mean, it's a low pass filter, but apart from that, I'm not too sure on the details. But you also have, here's a few options for velocity sensitivity, so you can set how influenced the volume of the sound is by the velocity of your keyboard press. So if you set it down here, it doesn't matter how hard you hit the keyboard on the key on the keyboard, it'll sound the same. Whereas all the way at the other extreme, you get that difference. And you can also modulate other parameters by the sensitivity, by the velocity here. So you'd have a cutoff frequency, for instance. I think you might have to turn this down for this to take effect, but we'll turn this down too, actually, so it's a bit more obvious. Doesn't work terribly well. Anyway, we'll set that back out now. One thing that is actually very handy is the envelopes, and these again are just like the envelopes in Xsynth. There's a couple more options, but the options are that have the same names as Xsynth do exactly the same things here. So you could set an attack time. More realistically, because we've already sampled the real attack of the flute, you might want to set a bit of a release time so that when the note cuts off, it doesn't just cut straight off. There's a little bit of a fade out there now, so that's quite nice. But you can, again, use envelopes on, say, the filter cutoff or even the pitch. Same kind of things you can do with modulation in Xsynth you can do here, so there's actually separate envelopes for each of these options. And there's also an LFO, or in fact, again, LFOs for each of these parameters: volume, panning, filter cutoff, filter resonance, and pitch. So you could, for instance, dial in a little bit of vibrato if you wanted to. It's probably a little bit too little. Sorry, wrong parameter. I want to set this parameter to 0.1 of a semitone, 0.2 of a semitone. Quite slow, so we'll speed it up a bit. Something that might actually work better to give the flute sound a bit more life, and this is something we did on Xsynth as well when I was synthesizing a flute, it would be to change the cutoff frequency of the filter. It's quite subtle and might actually not be coming out very well. If we turn this up a bit, a bit much now. Turn it down a little bit more. Just giving it just a nice subtle little variation as the sound plays out. So that can breathe a little bit more life back into the sound once you've set up those loop points and really just made it a loop over a very small segment of sound. Once you're done, you can just save your bank out. You can set up multiple patches. They'll just come up on the left here, and you can set different MIDI channels for each one. So if you have, say, 3 different sounds, you could have them all running in the one Specimen session with different MIDI channels. The only caveat there is that they're all going to come out the same set of left and right outputs, because Specimen only has, or a single instance of Specimen only has one set of stereo outputs. So they'll all get mixed into that. So if you wanted to route them into, say, their own tracks in ADA, that wouldn't be the way to do it. Instead, you would just fire up another instance of Specimen. And once you've done that, you can route its output separately and load up different patches into that. So that's a bit of a brief look into Specimen. Hopefully that helps out. Yeah, so that sort of shows not only what you can do with samples under Linux with a simple tool like Specimen, but also how learning the fundamentals of a tool like Xsynth can be really, really helpful when it comes to working with other synthesizers as well.